Rachel is a senior lecturer at St Mary's University in Twickenham, as I said right at the beginning. She's someone who has been using audience response systems for quite a long time and has seen their development and used them in lots of different ways. And I remember when we started working with St Mary's University, Rachel was a bit of a sort of pioneer at the university for sort of taking on Vevox and starting to use it. And I think she came from a sort of a past of using kind of physical handsets for that kind of student response before, but is now using sort of the mobile solution of Vevox mainly in her classroom. So she's going to be sharing some of those experiences, talking about some of the benefits of using them in large classes, but also in sort of small classes as well. And I think, Rachel, I'm going to hand over to you.
Fantastic. Okay, so firstly, thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk as part of the Vevox pedagogy series, Joe and the Vevox team. And hello to everyone on the other end. This is a bit unusual. I'm very familiar with using Teams and Zoom, where you can actually see yourself and the participants when you're delivering a session. With GoToWebinar, you can't. So it's a bit strange for me, but I'll assume you're all out there. So as Joe said, I'm going to talk today about my use of audience response systems in both large and small cohorts. I would say there are similarities, of course, but there are also things that I've experienced that I think they're like subtle differences. So we'll come to that later on. As Joe has already said, I included this slide, Joe, actually, as well. If you haven't already done so, please do jump on to Vevox and join this particular meeting, the code for which is on the screen there, 173826025. If you've not already done so, I do have a few questions throughout to kind of give examples of how I use Vevox, but also to ask you guys some questions. So just to start, I'll give you an overview of what I'm going to talk about for the next 20 minutes or so. I think it's really important when you are delivering sessions online to try and make yourself seem human. So I will, first of all, give you a little bit more of my background and convince you that I'm a real person. I'll then talk specifically about my use of audience response systems with large cohorts, and then I'll move on to looking at what I've done with small cohorts. I'll then kind of do a comparison between the two. And then coming towards the end, I'll talk about general challenges that I would foresee for both students and educators when you're approaching using an audience response system, and potentially ways in which these challenges can be overcome. And I'll end with just general hints and tips. So as Joe has said, the Q&A board is also open. If you've got any questions, please do ask the questions. And at the end, I'm sure we'll have time to look at those, and hopefully I'll be able to answer the questions that you have posed. So who am I? Okay, well, Joe has already given you a bit of an insight into who I am. So I am a senior lecturer, currently working in St Mary's University in Twickenham. I have been teaching in academia for over 15 years. I've taught in 3 different universities. So I taught in Trinity College in Dublin. First of all, I then moved to Queen Mary University in London, where I worked for quite a long period of time. And that's actually where I experienced using audience response systems with large cohorts. And I'm now at St Mary's University here for almost 2 years. Similar to Alice Luby, who gave one of the previous talks in this pedagogy series, I take a very student-centered approach to my teaching. I like to think that I'm very reflective in terms of my approach, very dynamic, very interactive. In kind of outside of my teaching, I'm very committed to outreach and community, and I have a background in pediatric physiotherapy as well. The pictures there represent some of what I have said already, but you can also see 2 messy and I would say cute kids. Those are my kids, those 2 little ones. So a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and I like to be quite active, and my husband is a pilot. So that kind of gives you the whole Rachel experience. But yes, I'm a human, and this is kind of where I'm at and what I'm about. Okay, so before I move into, looking at kind of large cohorts and small cohorts and comparison, For me, when I was first introduced to audience response systems, it was important to identify and read about what was thought to be the pedagogical value behind using them. I wanted to make sure I was taking, you know, an evidence-based approach to this teaching style. So having read some literature, over the years, I mean, these are the things that have always really kind of jumped out at me. And I would say that the, evidence base is growing and that it's gaining momentum. But the key kind of things were, it improves the lecture environment. This makes the lecture environment more interactive. And although the pedagogical research won't say it's more fun, I would say the students find it more fun, and I think that is not a bad thing. It makes them want to be there, and that kind of ties in with the last point on the slide there, which is better attendance. So there is some research that suggests that because it's more interactive and more engaging, students actually attend talk sessions better. Another benefit of audience response systems is that they facilitate participation by the whole cohort. I would say that that's more of an advantage with a large group, so anything over 200 students, where one of the huge challenges of teaching such a large group is that you don't necessarily feel that you can easily connect to everybody. So I think what audience response systems can help you with is feeling that you can connect and communicate with more, hopefully all of the cohort that you're teaching. I've already mentioned that it's known to be more kind of engaging for the students. It makes them feel kind of more engaged, more present, more attentive. It can support communication and also student collaboration. So I use various kind of peer-led kind of techniques with audience response systems. So this can kind of help student collaboration. I'll come back to that later on. Feedback, really valuable for both the educator and the student. And again, I'll elaborate on this later. You can use audience response systems as kind of a motivational tool. So in some instances, you can use leaderboards. I don't often use leaderboards, but you can use them. And this can, kind of work insofar as kind of making students feel kind of motivated to do well. But regardless of using leaderboard or not, I do think that, engaging them with kind of questions that either assess their knowledge or get their minds thinking or invoke discussion, it kind of keeps them with you and it motivates them to be involved. I've already mentioned peer instruction, and also in the literature, it does suggest that it can improve the quality of learning. So for me, I was kind of sold. I was like, right, sounds like it's good. At the time, I was teaching a large cohort. So for me, it made entire sense to try using the technology. So I was at Queen Mary University of London from 2013 to 2021. For the most part, I was teaching very large, I would say, student cohorts, although some of my colleagues were teaching even large numbers than this. So on average, I was teaching about 200 to 250 students in one go. The programs that I taught were these guys, all here in blue, were all bunched together. So we had biomedical science students, medical genetics, pharmacology and innovative therapeutics and neuroscience. They were all undergraduate programs and they were all grouped together, and I taught them on these kind of types of modules. So biomedical sciences 1 and 2 at level 4 and level 5. And then the other kind of group that I would teach would be the undergraduates in kind of biology, psychology, biochem and zoology. And for these students, the modules were kind of physiology focused. The lectures that I was delivering in this particular university were either 1 or 2 hour duration, and all of the delivery was face-to-face. So this is what I was looking at all the time. And as I said, having done my reading and feeling that there was a good kind of evidence base to support using audience response systems, I decided to give it a go. Where it was at the time, Queen Mary University of London had contracted with Turning Point. I think Rick had some discussion about the use of Turning Point. I know that he had used it before in one of the previous pedagogy sessions, Vevox pedagogy sessions. So we basically had a number of licenses and were encouraged to use and trial Turning Point. So what you can see on the side of the slide there is the clickers that we use. So Turning Point is an example of an audience response system. We used the clicker-based system with Turning Point. Turning Point has now come onwards and does have a web-based version. And I think that they also now offer, Joe, you may know this, but I think they also offer the option to be able to use Turning Point with different smart devices. At the time when I was using it, we used clickers. Now, in my use of clickers, they were not anonymous. So I would say that's both advantageous and not advantageous, depending on how you want to use it, what your application is. So where I was, what happened was when the students came in and they registered at the university, in our department, in our school, they were given a clicker. They had to pay a deposit for it. The clickers were registered to a particular number, and we knew that that was that particular student. So we were able to monitor, I suppose, in an advantageous way, their participation, engagement with sessions. If you did use the clicker and Turning Point technology for assessments, you could obviously then you would be able to report students, you would know students' marks and their performance. So yes, as I said, there are kind of pros and cons to the fact that we used the clickers and that they weren't anonymous, and I'll move on to that later on as well. So when I was using Turning Point, simply put, they offered a PowerPoint add-in. So the screenshot on the screen shows you where the PowerPoint add-in would sit. You literally clicked onto Turning Point and you would be able to add a new question of whichever style you would like. There are a number of different options for your questions. I've listed them here. There were more than the ones that I've listed on the slide, and the ones that I put in bold are the ones that I would have used most frequently. So the first question I have for you is, do you use PowerPoint to create your lecture slides? And I suppose the reason I'm asking this question is I think that a lot of people still do use PowerPoint in terms of creating lectures. And for that reason, it makes audience response systems like Turning Point and Vevox very accessible in terms of using that technology, in terms of this add-in function they have. So I'll just leave it a little bit longer for people to answer the question. So do you use PowerPoint to create your lecture slides? Yes or no? I'll give a 5-second countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And let's see how we did. Got a very sticky return button here at the moment. Yeah, okay, so as expected, a lot of you do use PowerPoint to create your lecture slides. And as I said, the point I'm just making here is that if something like audience response systems appeal to you after this and the other sessions that have been presented in the Vevox pedagogy series, I think it's an easy way to get started, is using this PowerPoint function. So what was my application with large cohorts? I've listed a number of things here. So for the first part, I felt that it would allow me to engage the students more in the sessions. It would allow me to make the environment more interactive. I was facing, 200 plus students. Of course, you feel that you can connect to some and maybe more the confident ones, but this allowed you to feel that you were connecting with more of them. It definitely helps to break up the content, I found. So especially with heavy content, if I included a question, it would break it up. Especially if you had a long session that was heavy, you could strategically place your questions so that, yes, you were breaking up the content to kind of keep everyone kind of with you on your toes. At that kind of 10 to 15 minute lull, you ask them a question, re-engages their minds, and you've got their attention again and you can move on. In line with that, then I would often use it for kind of knowledge check. So I think that's a very common way for using audience response systems, is to identify, if students have understood something you've taught them. And it also allows you to identify if there's a sticking point. So if a lot of them don't understand a particular concept or something you've been discussing, you can see that by your poll results, and you can decide in real time whether to devote more time to kind of clarifying concepts in the moment in the classroom, or going away and finding more activities and delivering and supporting them in other ways to help them understand those sticking points a bit better. I used it as well in terms of feedback. So, and I think that kind of ties in with the previous one. So in terms of the educator, it's really nice and important to know that your students do or do not understand things that you have taught. But also I think for the students, it's really important for them to think that they've understood it or not. So in that way, I kind of think the feedback is two-way. In terms of what way you can use and choose to use your questions, I quite like to facilitate independent thinking, and I've got an example of that later. So what I would do is I would give students a bit of background around a particular subject, and then I would ask them a question that would get them to apply that knowledge to see if they could then answer the question. So I feel that that's an example of kind of getting to independently think and process things that that I've kind of shared with them. I've also used it to stimulate discussion. So sometimes I would use, I'll ask an open question, which would stimulate discussion because the answer wouldn't always be, there's not one correct answer, for example. Peer instruction, I would use, turning point for peer instruction, and I'll give you an example of this later on. So I'd get students to answer a particular question on their own. I wouldn't reveal the answer. I'd then get them to discuss the same question with the person next to them or the person behind them. They'd answer the question again. I would then show them the correct answer, and I'd show them then the poll results for the answers to question 1 versus the answers to question 2. And what you will commonly see is that the answer, the second time they answer it, when they've talked to their peer, that they do a lot better. More of them get it right. And this, I think, I'm a huge advocate for peer learning, and I think this is the way of kind of showing them, providing evidence that it actually works, that it's really valuable to talk to your peers about subjects to gain a better understanding and kind of also confidence if you're the one who really feels strongly you know the answer, in terms of being able to explain that to somebody who maybe isn't so sure. And then finally, assessment. Now, for this, I kind of have a little kind of star for caution, I would say. So in a large cohort, it's valuable to be able to gauge, how students are doing and maybe create a formative quiz. That I would say I would definitely encourage. Okay, so formative quizzes, yeah, absolutely a goer. Summative quizzes I have done, but my real kind of note of caution would be you have to carefully plan it, very carefully, and you have to give them very clear instructions. You need to make it very clear whose responsibility it is to make sure that on the day, in this situation, their clicker had a battery, that they were on the correct channel for receiving the information, that their network connectivity was good. All these things have to be very clear beforehand, and also you need contingencies, I would say. So I did use it for assessment, and I feel like I got better and more confident at using it in assessment. And with a big group, it's great because the results then are instantaneous pretty much, and the students love getting that feedback straight away. However, as I said, I would use it kind of with caution. So here are some examples. So this is an example of where I would say to the students, right, we've talked about tachycardia. I maybe talked about it last week. I maybe talked about it this morning. And I would say to them, right, now I want you to tell me, what is tachycardia? Which of the following answers is most correct? So I don't know how many of you have a physiology background at all, but just for fun, let's give it a go. So what is tachycardia? Who thinks they know what the correct answer for this is? And in this instance, I'm asking you to answer the question on your own. We're going to simulate that you then talk about it with somebody else, maybe your dog, maybe somebody who's making you a cup of tea in the background, or a colleague who's in the office with you. But we'll simulate that just to give you an idea of how I would do the kind of peer instruction bit as well. Joe, I'm conscious I can't see a clock either, so if you need me to, speed along, do let me know.
Of course.
I'm Irish and I like to speak a lot, so I speak fast and a lot. So I'll try to stick to time. Okay, so 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I'll close the poll, and you're not going to see what the correct answer is, okay? But we can see how people have answered the question. Now, in a peer instruction scenario, what I would do is ask you all now to talk to somebody else in the locality, and as I said, probably the best options here are a pet, if you're at home, someone in your family, if you're in your office, a colleague. But let's imagine you've done that, okay? This isn't going to work, but I just kind of want you to see how it would work. And I want you just to, maybe having had a little bit more thought, and maybe genuinely having asked your cat if you thought they were going to be helpful with this particular question, answer the question again. Oh. Okay, so I haven't done that right, but let's imagine, in fact, can I redo that one? I don't think I can actually, Joe, can I? I can, delete. There we go, done it. Okay, so let's just answer it again, pretending, I said to Joe, should we do it this way? And I thought it was a good idea, and I thought about trying to get you all into groups to talk about it and then re-answer it, but that's not possible in GoToWebinar. So just answer again, having given it further thought, or having asked someone in your locality, and let's see if it works. I doubt it will, but hopefully you get the gist. And I'll count you down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. bear in mind, I've already given you the correct answer, so you should definitely all be getting it right now. And this is, brilliant, fantastic. So at this point, I would be, oh my gosh, what's going on now, Joe? This is where technology fails you, and in real time, you have to see what happens. So this is the correct answer, okay? Heart rate is greater than 100 beats a minute. So well done to those of you who got that correct answer. What happens then on the next slide? I don't know what's doing this today. If I reveal the results, it will show us, or should show us, technology failing me, Joe. It should show you, because I think I had to repeat the second question, what the first vote was versus the second vote. So what should happen here, everyone, is that you should see 2 bars for every option answer, and it will show you for the first vote versus the second vote. And again, what you should find is when your students have had some kind of peer interaction, that they answer better the second time around, proving to them that peer learning and peer instruction is valuable in their overall learning experience. So an example of where I would then, I would say, try to invoke independent thinking. This question here, when you have a cold, stuffy nose, it is harder to breathe. This is due to which of the following? So what I would have done in advance of this question is I would have talked about airflow in the lungs, and I would have talked about how resistance and pressure have an impact in terms of airflow. Once I felt they understood that, I would then ask them this question. So it's going to say, yeah, okay. So bearing in mind, you may not know this answer, but in a lecture with me, you would definitely have had the background knowledge. Let's see how you do. And I'll close the poll. And then the answer will come up. And the correct answer is an increase in resistance to airflow. So well done for those of you who did get the correct answer.
I feel like the answers have been pretty good so far.
I feel like they're doing well. I think they're doing well. Yes, this is an example of where I would say I'm trying to kind of invoke that independent thinking, but getting to bring them from another level. So getting them to do some of the kind of thinking work, and it's using what I've taught them to see if they really understand it in a kind of more contextual example. Final question then I have is one that is totally unphysiology related, which is what color is the sky? And this is maybe seems like a ridiculous example, but with this question, what I'm trying to do is there's obviously an answer that most people would naturally put, okay? But when we see the results, we should see that there's quite a spectrum, which is entirely true as well. So I would use a question like this, not this exact question, to invoke a discussion. So perhaps when I'm starting a new topic, I might kind of ask them a question that is quite open or could have a number of different possibilities, and ask them to answer the question. And then maybe we'd have kind of, a discussion about where and how all of those answers could be correct, and what's the kind of evidence or justification for that. So that's a really nice way of, I think, as well, using these systems. So I'll count you down. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Close the poll. Yeah, so as expected, most people always say the sky is blue, but as you can see, people have given different answers, and all of the other answers are valid and true. And again, that would be a really nice kind of, let's say, a springboard moment to kind of, then continue on a discussion about the different option answers and how maybe they are also true or also valuable. So that's kind of what I've done with large cohorts. Moving on to small cohorts. So I've been working at St Mary's University in Twickenham in London for almost 2 years now. I kind of moved here in the middle of the pandemic, which was interesting and challenging, but it is what it is. Really different kind of setup here in terms of my my kind of role. My teaching role. So I'm teaching a lot smaller groups. So versus, 250 plus to 20 to 35. I'm teaching primarily on the physiotherapy undergraduate program. I teach at the moment, it's actually a very new program, and we're actually just currently in the second year of its delivery. I teach clinical physiology and pathology, and I also teach research methods and EBP, evidence-based practice. Also quite different to my experience with large cohorts at Queen Mary University. I teach for 3-hour blocks. So that was a real change for me. Obviously, they're not really 3-hour blocks, and we have breakpoints throughout. But for that reason, I think where large cohorts, there's maybe a very obvious kind of application and value in using audience response systems, then maybe it seems less obvious in smaller cohorts. I think for me, having a 3-hour slot, then being able to use an audience response system was brilliant, because it really does keep them kind of really engaged and really involved throughout the session. In terms of delivery, obviously we've moved into kind of a very different time through the COVID pandemic. So there was quite a blend. So we do, last year we did as much as we could face-to-face, but we did have online. So it's quite a blended type of delivery. And I have used audience response systems in both. At Queen Mary, oh gosh, obviously the Marys are both there. So at Mary's, where I am now, they have a contract and license with Vevox. So very early on, when I started here, I was in touch with Joe, trying to get myself all set up. Similar to Rick's experience, let's say, what's the word I want to look for, the kind of transfer of knowledge from using one system to the other was really straightforward and easy. I would say my experience of Vevox versus my experience of Turning Point is that Vevox is far less glitchy. I would say also its kind of usability and functionality is better. And I would also say the Vevox support team is much, much better. So I have definitely found using Vevox a lot easier, albeit that I have had experience of using audience response systems in the past. So for those of you who did listen to Rick's, I don't want to kind of, Rick's talk, I don't want to kind of do too much overlap, but equally I think it's quite nice to kind of have some continuity. So you probably, are familiar with the options that Vevox has that Turning Point maybe does not have. But the audience response system with Vevox allows you to use it from any smart device, so a smartphone, a laptop, or a tablet. And I think a huge advantage of Vevox is that it is used anonymously, okay? And I think I'll tie that in with kind of student challenges later on. But I think that encourages students, definitely the more shy students, definitely the students who maybe don't feel so confident, it kind of encourages them even more to participate. With Vevox, you've got lots of different options. You've got a PowerPoint add-in. People use, I think it can be called a PowerPoint ribbon as well. Very similar to Turning Point. So again, you've got a screenshot here of one of my lectures, and then you can see the Vevox add-in. Very similarly, you just add a new Vevox slide and a question. And just to kind of mirror what Rick had said, you can also, if you've been using Turning Point, you literally click a button and it allows you to convert a Turning Point question into a Vevox question. So it's very, very seamless in terms of the transition. You also have a dashboard option, like a web option with Vevox, and you've got the Q&A board. What do I use? I was massively impressed by Alice Luby, who manages the Q&A board and everything else. I definitely don't think I would be able for that. I use primarily the PowerPoint add-in and the dashboard in different contexts. So similar again to Turning Point, you've got a number of different question styles that you can use. The ones that I use most are MCQ, partly because my examinations involve an MCQ component. And what I think is of real benefit to the students is them having practice with exam style questions. So I use MCQs with one single best answer for some of my question types. I also use multiple response because having listened to the creating cognitively engaging questions in quizzes that was delivered as part of one of the pedagogy Vevox pedagogy series last semester. I was really kind of let's say encouraged and inspired to try and kind of jazz things up a bit and really think carefully again about my types of questions. So I try to use quite a lot of variety in the question types that I use to make them more cognitively engaging. I also use word clouds, and I use the rating option as well. You have more options if you use the dashboard. So here you've got a kind of a screenshot of the dashboard on the right-hand side where you can set up quizzes and questions in your quizzes, or you can use or you can use the Q&A board. In terms of my application, the reason I have a number of things there that are grayed out is because those are exactly the same ways in which I would have used, or reasons I would have used, the audience response system for large cohorts, so they're not new per se. So for the same reasons that I used the audience response system with large systems, I do use it for a lot of the same reasons with small cohorts. The things that I would add that I've more recently kind of thought about doing and trying to do things in a new way and trial things is that and things that are different. So firstly, the assessment. I definitely use the dashboard a lot for formative quizzes. And I would always try to mix up the question types, making sure to include some that will be the style of those in an exam for them. I use these quizzes to do one of two things: either assess the understanding of the topics that have already been taught, either that week or for the past 4 weeks. What I found the students really like, especially with my kind of clinical physiology and pathology module, which they really struggle with, is that they like regular quizzes that assess all of their knowledge that they've covered so far. So it allows them to see how well they're doing, or are they really on top of the material. And the other way I've used it recently, so one thing you will find, and this is a challenge, which again, I'm kind of a bit overlapping and coming back, but one challenge of using audience response systems is that you may be teaching and you realize that your students, having answered a question, they don't understand a topic well at all. And you have to make a decision in that moment in time, whether you devote time to helping them understand it there and then. I have mentioned this already, this is contingent teaching, or whether you bank it and come back to it in some other way or offer them some other support. If you deal with it there and then, obviously what happens is that you lose lecture time. And this is one of the, I would say, it's not a negative because I think you can kind of overcome it, but it's one thing that you have to bear in mind. So to overcome this, what I've started to do this year is actually choose to take content out to allow there to be more time in the lecture, and essentially then use the audience response system in a way to assess, kind of flipped learning topics. So I will put material up on Moodle to support their learning of more simple topics. I would say it doesn't make sense to do the complicated stuff. So if I want them to kind of have an introduction to something, I'll say, right, I've created these slides, these extra resources, this media, whatever it is, please engage with that. And when you come to the start of your next session, we're going to do a quiz, and that's going to assess your knowledge on that area. I will expect you to get, a certain amount of this right, so I feel confident we can move on to the more complicated stuff. So I think that's been a really positive experience for me, actually, and it's really freed up that time in the lecture to do that contingent teaching, which I kind of think you want to do with audience response systems. It's nice. It makes it feel more real, on the pulse, and that you are really engaging in that moment with the students. Word clouds, I love a word cloud. So where in the past I would have liked to use questions that are quite open to invoke discussion. Another way you can do that is use word clouds. I didn't have that option with Turning Point. So if you want to ask students, tell me the different styles of kind of research design or study design that you are familiar with or that you've heard of, and they put them up on the board, and that kind of, you then see them in the word cloud, and it's really nice then to kind of, it gives you an idea of where they're at before you kind of move on to other stuff, or it can start a kind of a nice discussion around a topic. And finally, the other thing I've done is I now quite like to ask students to create quiz questions. I'm a real fan of active learning as well. So I'll have some time in the session where I say to students, right, we've covered, this number of topics over the last 4 weeks. I want to give you half an hour in groups of 3 to come up with 2 or 3 quiz questions, like the ones that I use in class, and I will then create a bank of those, and then I will select some of those and use them in a quiz for them. So I find that that's a really nice thing to do as well. So moving on to challenges, I mean, I've mentioned some of these already. I think it makes sense to split them up into kind of student challenges and, educator instructor challenges. For a student, the most common challenge is that it's new, okay? It's a new method of learning. There is some research to suggest that students can kind of find things a little bit more confusing, because obviously, if they think they've got something right and then another student thinks something else is right, it can cause some element of confusion. And as well, they don't always like being monitored. But obviously with Vevox, you don't have that issue because it's anonymous. In terms of the instructor or educator, I think the most daunting thing is that, we're all time poor, and that you'll need some time to just familiarize yourself with the technology, set it up and get going with it. I think another challenge is this idea of contingent teaching. It makes you feel like you're on the spot, like you saw earlier. I had some technology glitches. How do you manage that? You just need to, think about how you're going to manage it and have a plan B. Again, I'll talk about how we overcome these things in a moment. How do we make sure we cover the material? Because there will be time lost. So I've mentioned this already. I think there are ways around it. Obviously there'll be time lost when you are introducing questions or quizzes into your lecture time. I think it's really important to develop good questions. So, having any old questions in there isn't probably very helpful. So, it does take time to think about, are your questions cognitively engaging? Are they valuable? Are they assessing what you want to assess? Are they doing what you want them to do? And then finally, I've touched on this already, you know, the technology glitches, like what do you do? How confident do you feel about troubleshooting? And all of those things can just mean that it's daunting for somebody. In terms of overcoming these things, for students, I would say, in my experience, they would either say like, it's fine and it's not, I've never had a student say they don't like it. So they either are very positive about it, because let's face it, for the most part, I would say my students at least are much more tech savvy than I am, and they just, you know, it's very easy for them to kind of navigate, familiarize themselves with in terms of the functionality and stuff. So in my experience, students have been very, very positive. I have read in the literature that it can kind of sit on the fence, so that basically students are either kind of benign to it or they like it. So, I mean, that's kind of a win-win in my eyes, really. In terms of giving you real evidence, always with my module feedback, I get positive comments from students. I don't ask them specifically about my use of an ARS, but they will always comment on it. So these are just a few. So made lectures interesting and interactive. With the use of the ARS, general understanding was gauged and lecturers were adapted accordingly. I like the use of the MCQ questions. It gives me an idea of what question types will be on the exam. Found Vevox helpful in cementing what I just learned. So in my experience, the students are very, very positive about the use of an audience response system. In terms of how to overcome the challenges for the educator, I think the most obvious thing is that you get some training. I would say, actually, both audience response systems that I've used, although I definitely have found Vevox easier, not just because I was familiar with audience response systems before. It's very accessible, it's very intuitive, it's very straightforward. And what I would say is that the Vevox team are incredibly supportive. So any minor issues I had at the start, you know, Joe was always on hand to help me out and figure things out. So I think that's, you know, definitely a plus. I would say the more you use it, the more confident you get. That sounds really obvious, but that applies to not only the technology and figuring out, you know, kind of how to kind of manage any technology glitches or how to troubleshoot things, but also in terms of your delivery and managing the cohort in response to, you know, kind of questions that maybe aren't answered very well, for example. I think seek advice on creating effective questions, possibly from colleagues at your, you know, institution who have already been using the technology or similar technology for some time. And then, although, yes, lecture time is lost, I don't see that as a negative. I think it is time well spent, and I think that there are ways in which you can overcome that, such as flipped learning, because, you know, I feel like overall the learning experience is enhanced, it's much more interactive, it's dynamic, it's positive, it's engaging, all of those things. So I don't really see that. Yes, it's a challenge, but I think you can kind of, you can work around it, and I think the benefits outweigh maybe the disadvantages. So coming to compare them, I don't think that there is, I think that an audience response system can be used effectively in both a large cohort and a small cohort. I think there are a lot of similarities. In terms of the pedagogical value, I think the pedagogical value is the same for both large and small cohorts, and my application has primarily been the same. So you're probably thinking, well, what's the difference then? I do think there are subtle differences. So I think I said this at the start, but with a large cohort, a big challenge is that you don't feel you are able to communicate and reach all of your students. And what an audience response system will do is it will help you do that. It will help you achieve it. Maybe not entirely, but it will help. It allows you to engage all or more of your students, allows you to connect with all or more of your students. It also allows the students not to feel anonymous. So it's very easy when you've got 250 plus students sitting in front of you for, you know, student, you know, Joe blogs in whatever, you know, row 46, to just feel like they're just not there. They're not, you know, no one's talking to them. And I think an audience response system helps to remove that, you know, kind of feeling. I would also say audience response systems are very useful for assessments, definitely formative ones. Summative ones, yes, very useful, but again, I would have my kind of caution advisory, as I've already mentioned. I think the difference with a small cohort is you've got more flexibility. With a large cohort, you know, if things go wrong, it is more daunting, it is more difficult to manage. The contingent teaching is just, it's just a little bit more scary, I would say. In a small cohort, I think it allows you more quickly to build up your confidence, try different things, and I would say there's more flexibility. So easier to manage the cohort, easier to just feel confident in kind of, getting over those technology glitches. And also in my experience, so over the last 2 years of being, teaching in a much more smaller cohort, I felt more confident about trying new things. So this flipped learning thing, I was like, do you know what, I'm going to give this a go and see if I can free up more lecture time by flipping the learning and doing it this way. And that's been a really positive experience for me. So I think what I'm trying to say overall is that the application is quite similar in both. I think there's a real strong evidence base, and I would be I'm a real kind of advocate for using this technology with both, sizes of cohorts. And I would just say there are subtle differences in what you're able to achieve with those different group sizes. I think just to finish then, general hints and tips. I think it's really important to carefully think about your intention. Why are you using an audience response system? What are you trying to achieve? Think carefully about developing effective questions, be diverse, use different types. I was saying that I commonly use MCQ questions with a single best answer. That's because my exams typically have that format, but I've recently started moving to, in other kind of situations, using, multiple response answers, which again can be a bit more cognitively engaging. In terms of my advice for using like a Vevox add-in or ribbon, I would say do not overdo it. Start slow. For me, I typically have a question embedded in a PowerPoint session every 15 to 20 minutes. I feel like that is where the natural lull occurs, and it's a nice kind of time to like get the students back engaged and feel that you are connecting with them again. In terms of the dashboard, I've used the dashboard a lot for quizzes. So having a quiz of either 5 questions or 10 questions, I either have those at the start of a lecture to check comprehension of previously taught topics over all of the previous weeks, or maybe just cardiovascular physiology, for example, or I would have a quiz at the start of the lecture to identify how well they've done in terms of the flipped teaching element that I've kind of created for them online. I also have reflection quizzes, so sometimes at the end of a session, I'll have like a short quiz that allows them to kind of feel confident that they've maybe learned something in that session, and it allows them kind of feedback to kind of feel that, they feel they are on top of a particular topic or they're not with relation to what you've just taught them. So that is it. The very last question I have for you is whether you found this webinar useful or not. I thought this would be valuable for me. I'm not going to reveal the answers just in case no one found it useful and I feel completely stupid. But I thought it would be nice for me to know whether you found this webinar useful. And I look forward to trying to answer some of your questions.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm just going to take control again.
Yeah.
And we do have some time for some Q&A. Yeah, so thank you very much for that. So it's something I was really looking forward to, and it didn't disappoint. It was really interesting, so thank you. We'll get into some Q&A. We don't have much time, so we'll probably just answer.
Sorry, I'm a real chatter.
That's absolutely fine. But we will, what I think we'll do is we'll take away some of those questions and, maybe answer them, behind the scenes, and look to put something out with maybe theme the questions and put out some answers to those themes. What I did just want to let people know about is the recording for this will go up on our YouTube channel after this. So if you want to catch up afterwards, you can. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel. That will get you all the latest videos, all the latest sort of news and things that come out of there. And yeah, I want to now just have a quick look at the Q&A board. So I'm just going to bring that over. So yeah, we've probably got time for a couple of questions. So I will pick the ones that have got the most liked. So
I've also said, just if we don't cover things today that people would really like me to answer personally, please email me. Not a problem.
Oh yeah, awesome, thank you. So question here. I know you shared some of the a little bit around the sort of the feedback you got around students, but yeah, what generally is the kind of the student feedback you get about using Vevox?
Yeah, I would say, you know, I had to be selective about, you know, the quotes that I gave, but I had so many to choose from, and just in my experience, students say, I mean, the common things are that they like that it kind of assesses their knowledge and it gives them that feedback, you know, whether they, you know, how they're doing, whether they've understand topics or not. I think, you know, kind of more recent kind of feedback that I've enjoyed is that, you know, they like the fact that it kind of replicates and gives them an idea of what type of questions will be on an exam. It, you know, it makes them feel more confident in the material. I mean, I'm someone who also very strongly believes in, you know, trying to build students' confidence. And I think if you're able to do that by offering them an opportunity to answer questions that, you know, give them a boost and make them think, gosh, I do know this, that's really nice. So, you know, yes, it can improve confidence as well. So is that okay? Does that answer the question, William, do you think?
I think so. Okay, I'm going to pick one more here. So, because I know you talked a lot about, you know, sort of the polling side. Do you use the Vevox Q&A board?
No. So I was saying this earlier. I don't use it, and in fact, I was really inspired by Alice using it. I would like to try personally, but I, at the moment, you know, it's one of those things where I'm always keen to try new things. I'm sure you can all appreciate that, having spoken to me today. But for the most part, I think when Alice said she used it, she uses a separate screen. I think that is the way you have to do it. I don't know how you manage it otherwise. But I think using a Q&A board, I think it is useful, but it kind of demands another level of contingent teaching. And, you know, I think I wouldn't suggest you do a Q&A board straight away, personally. I think you start slow with the technology, get yourself familiar, and as you move up and you feel more confident, then try the Q&A. It gives you very valuable feedback, but it's managing a lot of things. And as of yet, I haven't done it, and I wouldn't feel that confident, but I'll give it a go.
Do you think it would? Do you think you'd use it differently with a sort of larger cohort than you would a sort of smaller cohort? I appreciate you haven't. So it's a
good question.
Theoretical question.
Well, going back to my if where I would start is with a small cohort, because I would worry with a large cohort. This is the thing, right? I feel with a small cohort, it's just more manageable, the whole thing. So like with a large cohort, I would just worry that there'd be so many coming in that it would be a bit overwhelming. Whereas a small cohort, I would imagine as a first step, it would be, you know, a little bit more easy to kind of stay on top of. But no, I think it's still giving you the same information, isn't it? It's still letting you know generally how people are doing. So yeah, is that okay? Yeah,
that's good. Cool. In the interest of time, I think we need to finish up.
Oh no, I'm so sorry. If I'd seen my timer, I would have whizzed myself along. I apologize, everyone. I hope I've been comprehensive, and as I said, please do feel that you can email me personally if you would like to. I think my email's somewhere, or else Joe will put it somewhere.
Yeah, we'll share that, and it's there's no need to apologise at all. It's absolutely fine. We don't have any kind of strict rules on how long the webinar needs to be. But yeah, what we'll do is we'll gather those questions up, and yeah, maybe have a look at them afterwards and try and get some answers out to some of those questions. But yeah, all I've got to say is thank you very much to everyone for yeah, joining today's session. Apologies, obviously we had to reschedule it from before, but yeah, and also thank you very much for joining for the whole webinar series as well. It's been brilliant to run, and you know, we've been getting some really positive feedback on that. So we'll certainly be running more of these sort of series in the future. So yeah, thank you very much. And if you've got any other questions, you know, following that, please do get in touch. Best email address is probably education@vevox.com, or as Rachel said, she's very happy to receive emails.
Yeah, definitely.
As well.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you very much, guys. And yeah, we'll end it there.